A curtain of cold rain draped over the city as dusk settled into twilight. Neon lights from skyscrapers and street lamps shimmered on rain-slick pavement, transforming the ordinary street into a mirror of glowing reds and golds. Dante Giordano stepped out of the glass doors of his high-rise office building and into the downpour without flinching. The fine Italian leather of his shoes splashed through shallow puddles as he walked to the black sedan waiting at the curb. Normally, his driver would be holding an umbrella over his head by now, but Dante had dismissed him for the evening. Tonight he needed no company and no witnesses. Inside the car, Dante sat for a moment in silence. The soft rumble of the engine and the thrum of rain on the windshield were the only sounds. He preferred it that way. Silence made it easier to think. As he ran a hand through his dark hair, slicking back the few strands the rain had dampened, his eyes drifted upward, following the sleek lines of the skyscraper he owned. On the top floor was his office, imposing, sterile and cold as the persona he wore daily. It was a kingdom of glass and steel from which he ruled the city's underworld under the guise of legitimate business. Yet within those walls, there was one person who made that cold office feel oddly warm on occasion. Elena Russo, his secretary. Throughout the day, Elena was efficient, composed and polite, always one step ahead of his needs. She had a quiet strength that intrigued him more than he cared to admit. And lately, far too often, Dante found his gaze lingering on her when she wasn't looking. A stray wisp of her chestnut brown hair escaping her bun, or the way her green eyes sparked with determination when she defended an idea. These small things had lodged themselves under Dante's skin. It was an unwelcome vulnerability. Dante Giordano did not indulge in personal feelings, especially not for an employee. He had learned long ago that attachments could become weaknesses. Tonight, however, something in Elena's behavior had stirred his suspicion. Dante replayed the moments from earlier that evening in his mind. It was just past 6. The rain had started as the workday ended. Elena had been packing up her desk promptly, which was not unusual. She often stayed late if he needed her, but he'd given her permission to leave on time. What caught his attention was the slight flush on her cheeks as she glanced at the clock, and the tiny, almost imperceptible smile that curved her lips. When she looked at her phone before slipping it into her purse, she appeared eager. In the years she had worked for him, Dante had rarely seen Elena look so quietly excited to leave the office. He hadn't meant to pry. Dante respected privacy in theory, but a pang of curiosity had hit him unexpectedly. Dante realized he knew very little about Elena's life outside of work. Who or what put that spark in her eyes just now? The thought of someone making her smile like that sent an unfamiliar tightness through his chest. He remembered the way her face would light up on the rare occasions, when she laughed at a joke a colleague told, or when she spoke of a book she loved. He had seen hints of warmth behind her professional demeanor, but tonight she almost glowed. And it wasn't because of him. That truth prodded at Dante's pride and something deeper, something dangerously close to jealousy. He told himself it was simply caution. As a man in his position, he needed to know if his secretary's after-hours activities could pose a risk to his operations. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not fully. Not after all he'd lost in the past. Perhaps Elena had secrets. Perhaps she was meeting someone who might compromise her loyalty. Dante's jaw clenched at the thought. Loyalty was everything to him. He'd had betrayals before, memories he kept buried. But Elena? He didn't want to imagine her betraying him. The car's windshield wipers swung in a steady rhythm, clearing the water that poured down the glass. Dante inhaled slowly, the scent of damp leather and a faint trace of his cologne grounding him. Finally, resolve hardened in his chest. He would follow her, just this once, to put his doubts to rest. It was a simple order to himself. Find out where Elena goes, who she meets, and ensure nothing she did would endanger what was his. He told himself it was business. That was easier than admitting he couldn't stand the idea of Elena laughing and smiling at someone else the way she never did with him. Dante shifted the car into gear and pulled away from the curb. Up ahead, under the glow of a street lamp, he caught sight of Elena's slender figure as she exited the building lobby, umbrella in hand. Even through streaks of rain, he recognized her gray coat and the careful way she walked around puddles. Instead of calling out or offering her a ride, something a considerate employer might do, Dante hung back, letting a couple of cars create distance between his sedan and her. The thrill of pursuit was an old feeling, one he usually experienced while hunting down rivals or threats. It unsettled him that he now felt that adrenaline because of Elena. Still, he followed her. The city at twilight was alive despite the rain. Headlights and neon signs blurred into watery halos on the slick streets. Dante kept a firm grip on the steering wheel as he navigated through traffic, always keeping Elena's taxi in sight. She had indeed hailed a cab a block from the office. Prudent of her not to walk alone at night, he thought with a faint surge of approval. Rain battered the roof of his car, a steady patter that matched the racing of his pulse. As he followed, Dante noticed everything. How the cab's taillights flared red at each stop, how pedestrians huddled under awnings for shelter, how the scent of rain-soaked pavement mixed with city smog seeped in through his vents. His world was usually a symphony of ordered meetings, security details, and controlled environments. Now he was out in the chaotic night city, chasing an impulse he couldn't fully justify. He recalled the moment years ago when he first learned the cost of trust. A ghost of a memory flickered. Rain had featured in that memory too. Dante shook it off. Tonight was about Elena, he reminded himself. The taxi turned toward a part of town Dante seldom visited. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was ordinary. A neighborhood known for its cafes, bookshops, and a small park nestled between apartment buildings. Through the streaked windshield, Dante watched Elena's cab stop in front of a cozy-looking cafe, its large front window spilling warm light onto the wet sidewalk. A painted sign above the door read La Finestra, and inside, he could see the amber glow of hanging lights and silhouettes of patrons. Dante parked on the opposite side of the street, under the shadow of a large oak tree that dripped water onto his hood. From here, he had a clear view into the cafe without being immediately noticeable. He cut the engine and left the wipers on their intermittent setting. Each swipe gave him a split-second clear view of the scene inside. Elena stepped out of the cab, closed her umbrella, and shook off some droplets before entering La Finestra. In that brief moment, Dante glimpsed her face. She was smiling softly, tucking that stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear. Dante felt his chest tighten again. That gentle expression wasn't one he'd seen at the office, where stress and formality often kept her, features set in concentration or polite reserve. This smile was personal, unguarded. "Who are you meeting, Elena?" he wondered. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere looked warm and lively. People gathered in intimate clusters at small round tables, shoulders close and heads bent in conversation, a stark contrast to Dante's own realm of marble floors and stiff suits. Elena navigated through the crowd with an easy familiarity, exchanging greetings with a barista who waved at her. She shrugged off her coat, revealing the simple navy dress she'd worn beneath it. Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. At the office, that dress had been hidden under a blazer. Here, with her sleeves bare and her hair now let down from its workday, she must have released it after leaving. As it now fell in gentle waves past her shoulders, she looked different, relaxed, beautiful. He found himself leaning forward, brow almost touching the cool glass of the windshield, as he watched her approach a corner of the cafe near a fogged-up window. There, at a table adorned with a small vase of flowers, stood a man who rose the moment he saw Elena. Dante's fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter. The man was tall, around Dante's height, with a friendly, open face. Even from a distance, Dante could tell the guy was probably about Elena's age, mid-20s to 30, with a lean build. He wasn't dressed in anything remarkable, just a green sweater and jeans, but when he enveloped Elena in a quick, warm hug, something in Dante's chest ignited. He told himself it was protective instinct. For all he knew, this man could be anyone, though his casual, wholesome appearance hardly screamed criminal or threat. It would have eased Dante's mind if the man seemed suspicious. But no, Dante had to admit, to any outsider, this looked like nothing more than a normal meeting between friends or maybe a date. Elena sat down across from the man, her back partly to the window, so Dante could observe her profile. The man said something, and Elena laughed, a bright, unreserved laugh that Dante felt like a punch to his gut. In the office, Elena's laughs were always quiet, restrained professional chuckles at a coworker's joke or a polite smile during meetings. But here she was radiant, eyes crinkling at the corners, one hand coming up to cover her mouth as she giggled at whatever comment the man made. Dante realized he'd never made her laugh like that. He had given her curt nods of approval, rare compliments on her work, but never anything that could provoke the kind of joy he saw now on her face. It stung more than he expected. Rain hammered on the roof of the car, mirroring the sudden torrent of emotions inside him. Envy, hurt pride, confusion as to why he even cared this much. He shifted in his seat, instinct urging him to march in there and stake his claim, though logically he knew Elena was not his possession. She was an employee, one he fiercely valued, yes, but free to do as she wished outside of work. Still, the primal part of Dante, the part shaped by being a mafia boss used to control and command, bristled at the sight of Elena sharing her smiles with another man. The man reached across the table, offering Elena a small gift, a pastry wrapped in a napkin perhaps, taken from the plate between them. Elena's face lit up in gratitude, and she teasingly swatted the man's hand before taking a bite. Dante couldn't hear their conversation, but he saw the easy camaraderie. The way the man looked at her, with familiarity and affection, made Dante's throat tighten. Who the hell is he? The question thundered in Dante's mind. A friend? A lover? Had she ever mentioned a boyfriend or close male friend in passing? Dante strained to recall, but Elena was always discreet, never oversharing about her personal life at work. He only knew that she moved to the city a couple of years ago, had a mother living upstate whom she visited on occasional weekends, and had she ever mentioned siblings? If she had, he couldn't remember. He hadn't thought to ask. Dante cursed under his breath. Why hadn't he dug deeper into Elena's background? He prided himself on knowing everything about those who worked for him. Granted, he'd run a standard background check when hiring her. She had a flawless record, glowing references, a degree from a good university. Nothing had seemed out of the ordinary. But that check hadn't detailed her day-to-day social life or family, beyond confirming next of kin. Inside, Elena was animatedly talking, using her hands as she sometimes did when excited. The man listened attentively, chin propped on his hand, smiling in that protective, brotherly kind of way. Brotherly, the word popped into Dante's mind unbidden. Something about their interaction in that moment lacked a certain romantic tension. It was affectionate, yes, but could it be platonic? Family, even? Dante tried to recall if her file ever mentioned siblings. Before he could dwell on it, Elena was picking up her coat again. The man donned a jacket. Then, to Dante's alarm, both of them headed for the exit together. He realized if they came out, they would see his car parked right across the narrow street. And if Elena noticed him, what explanation did he have? That he happened to be here, lurking in the dark during a rainstorm at the exact place and time she met this person? It would shatter whatever trust they had. Dante cursed and slid down in his seat, picking up his phone as a cover. He pretended to be engrossed in it, though his eyes flicked up to watch through the rain-beaded window. The cafe door opened, and Elena stepped outside with the man. The awning above them offered scant shelter, so the man immediately raised his umbrella, extending it over both their heads. Elena laughed as they jostled to fit beneath the small canopy, and Dante's stomach knotted at the casual intimacy of it. They stood by the curb, talking for another minute. Their voices were muffled by the rainfall, but Dante could make out Elena's tone gentle, appreciative, and the man's warm, steady rumble in response. Finally, a car, a blue sedan, pulled up, perhaps a rideshare the man had called. The man gave Elena a quick one-armed hug, holding the umbrella over her until her own taxi arrived a moment later. She must have ordered one while still inside. Ever practical, Elena never liked lingering outside alone. Dante exhaled slowly only after. Elena's taxi drove off, and the blue sedan with the man had merged into traffic and disappeared. He hadn't realized until now that his heart was pounding. His palms felt clammy against the leather steering wheel. The street was quiet again, just the rain and a few distant horns. Dante sat up properly, wiping a hand over his face. What now? He had answers to some questions, but even more questions in their place. Elena had met a man in a friendly, possibly intimate setting. They clearly cared for each other, but there had been that moment of seriousness that hinted at something beyond a simple date, and Dante still didn't know who he was to her. Jealousy burned hot in his veins, but so did worry. If there was something troubling Elena, something that made her expression turn concerned like that, he wanted to know. He wanted to help if she needed help. And if worst case, Elena was somehow betraying him, he needed to know that too, for both their sakes. Dante picked up his phone at last, unlocking it to see the text he had ignored earlier. As expected, it was from Carlo, his right-hand man and head of security. Meeting with the suppliers is rescheduled to tomorrow. Need anything else tonight, boss? Normally, Dante would not leave such messages hanging, but tonight he had been occupied. His fingers hovered over the screen as he considered his response. He typed quickly, "Need a favor. There's a license plate I need identified." He recalled the blue sedan's plate the man left in, reciting it from memory into the message. Carlo's response came almost immediately, despite the late hour. "On it, boss." Dante allowed himself a tight smile. Carlo never questioned why, He simply did as asked. Dante would have the man's identity soon enough. But that wasn't all. After a second's hesitation, Dante texted another instruction. Also, discreetly have someone follow Elena's taxi. Ensure she gets home safe. Report if she makes any stops. There. He tried to ignore the discomfort in his gut at his own orders. Spying on Elena made him feel like he was crossing a line. But he justified it. If this man turned out to be harmless, no one would ever need to know. And if not, if he posed any threat to her, or to Dante's operations, then Dante would have the upper hand in protecting what was important. What was important? The fact that his first thought was protecting Elena, not protecting his business secrets, was not lost on him. Dante leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. Admitting the depth of his feelings, even in the privacy of his own mind, was terrifying. It made him feel exposed, the way he had felt years ago with a friend's betrayal. But Elena was not that friend. Dante repeated that silently like a mantra. Elena was warm and genuine. If she had secrets, he prayed they weren't of the sort that would break him to discover. He started the car again and finally pulled away, driving off into the rainy night. As Dante sped through the city, splashing through endless puddles, he vowed that by tomorrow he would know the truth. He had ignited a fuse tonight. His jealousy was aflame now, demanding answers. Outside his window, the city lights blurred by, but in his mind he saw only Elena's face laughing with someone else. And it was a sight he knew he couldn't bear to see again. Dante's mind was still reeling hours later as he paced in his penthouse study. He should have been resting, but sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena in that cafe, smiling at another man. The image stabbed at him, stirring feelings he wasn't used to grappling with. It wasn't just anger or betrayal, those he understood. It was a raw, anxious hurt, a feeling that frightened him with its intensity. He downed a glass of whiskey, hoping it would steady the turmoil inside. Lightning flickered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, now only distant heat lightning as the storm moved on. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. Dante snatched it up, reading Carlo's report. The license plate belonged to a Marco Russo, 30 years old. The deeper check came right after. Marco Russo, Detective, City Police, Organized Crime Division. Dante's breath left him in a long exhale. A detective. Elena had been with a cop. His first thought was anger. Had she been informing on him? His second was denial. No, she wouldn't. He knew Elena's character. But the coincidence was too great. Detective Russo. Could it be her brother? Russo was her last name, too. Dante's mind flashed back. Her emergency contact had been at M. Russo. He had glossed over it at the time. His throat tightened. Elena's secret wasn't a lover. It was family. Family that happened to be a law officer, investigating men like Dante. A mix of relief and frustration coursed through him. Relief that she likely hadn't been on a romantic date at all. Dante could see it now. The platonic ease, the protective hug, it made sense if he was her brother. But frustration and a sharp sting of betrayal that she hadn't trusted. Dante with this information. You've never mentioned a brother, Elena. His brow furrowed. Of course she hadn't, because if he had known, he might never have hired her in the first place. He sank into the leather armchair, the adrenaline of jealousy giving way to exhaustion, and a deep ache in his chest. Dante rubbed a hand over his face. Could he really blame her for keeping it secret? A mafia boss and a detective's sister fate had a cruel sense of humor. His phone buzzed again. Tale confirms she arrived home safe. Lights on in her apartment. No signs of trouble. Dante loosened a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. At least she was safe. Another text. Detective Russo's service record is solid. No indications he's dirty. Do you want us to handle this? Dante understood Carlo's euphemism. If a cop was nosing around his business, the typical response would be to eliminate the threat. He typed back quickly, No, not yet. Just keep an eye on him. I'll handle matters personally. He would not harm Elena's brother, unless there was absolutely no other choice. Even the thought of how that would destroy her made his stomach turn. Dante stood and began pacing again. He ran a hand through his hair, still damp from earlier. Everything had become infinitely more complicated. Elena was caught between two worlds, now loyalty to her family and loyalty to him. Had last night been purely personal for her? Or had Marco pumped her for information? Dante's chest tightened at the thought that she might have been under pressure from her brother to spy on him. Would she tell him if so? He wasn't sure. As dawn approached, Dante realized one thing with clarity. He had to talk to Elena. Keeping silent would only widen the rift. He needed to hear the truth from her own lips, and perhaps he needed to finally be truthful with her about how he felt. He grabbed his suit jacket and headed for the private elevator. The driver would take him to the office early, and when Elena arrived, they would have that conversation come hell or high water. The next morning dawned gray and damp after the night's relentless rain. Elena woke with a heaviness in her chest that the cool shower couldn't wash away. She had slept poorly, tossing and turning over the previous evening's meeting with her brother, and an unsettling feeling she couldn't shake. As she dressed for work, fitted charcoal skirt and a pale green blouse, Elena caught herself checking the street through her apartment window twice. It almost felt like someone had been watching her last night. When her taxi dropped her home, she'd had the odd sense of eyes on her, but chalked it up to nerves. After all, she'd spent the evening discussing dangerous things with Marco, and a bit of paranoia was natural. She shook off the thought and focused on getting out the door. Marco's words from their dinner echoed in her mind. "Just be careful, Ellie. That job, that man you work for, he's not who you think." Elena had snapped at her brother then, defensive of her boss in a way that surprised even her. She told Marco that Dante treated her professionally, that she could handle herself, and that not every corner of her life needed her big brother's interference. Marco eventually relented, but not before making her promise she'd consider finding safer employment. He had also let slip after much prodding from her that a turf war might be brewing between Dante's organization and others, a warning he intended for her safety. That revelation left Elena more anxious than she admitted aloud. If a war was coming, where would that leave her? By the time Elena arrived at the Giordano Industries office building, she had composed her face into the neutral, pleasant mask she wore every day. The lobby's polished granite floors gleamed under bright lights, and the security guards greeted her with polite nods as usual. Everything seemed normal, yet, as she rode the elevator up to the executive floor, that prickling sensation of being watched returned. She glanced over her shoulder in the mirror-polished elevator walls, half expecting to see someone lurking behind her. No one was there, just her own reflection, looking paler and more tense than usual. The elevator doors opened to the hushed hall that led to Dante's office suite. Elena took a deep breath and stepped out. She was early, as always, beating most of the staff. Normally, she relished these quiet moments to organize the day's agenda. Today, however, the silence put her on edge. She walked past the empty assistant desks and unlocked her small office adjacent to Dante's. It was a cozy space, but she had a window with a view of the city skyline still shrouded in morning mist. Elena set down her bag and powered on her computer. As she went through the motions of checking emails and arranging Dante's schedule, she couldn't help replaying yesterday in her mind. Did I do the right thing meeting Marco? She wondered. She had told herself it was just dinner with her brother. Dante didn't own her free time. Yet guilt gnawed at her. Not because she'd done anything wrong, she hadn't, but because she hated hiding any part of her life. She had always been a terrible liar, and working for a man like Dante, even as just his secretary, had forced her to become more private, more cautious with personal details. If Dante knew her brother was a detective, Elena bit her lip and shook her head. No, that wasn't a bridge she wanted to cross unless absolutely necessary. Surely it would change how he viewed her, maybe even put her in an impossible position. Lost in thought, Elena nearly jumped out of her skin when the phone on her desk rang. She exhaled, chastising herself for being jumpy, and picked it up. "Mr. Giordano's office." Elena speaking, she answered, her voice steady with professional warmth. "Elena, good morning." It was Dante's voice, deep and controlled on the line. Hearing him made her sit up straighter automatically. "Please come into my office." "Of course, sir." "Give me one moment," she replied. The line disconnected immediately. Dante was not one for pleasantries over the phone. Elena hung up and quickly smoothed her blouse, her palms suddenly damp. She took her notepad and pen, as if to take dictation, and crossed the few steps to Dante's door. It was already slightly ajar, waiting. She entered to find Dante behind his massive oak desk, a stack of documents in front of him. He did not immediately look up when she walked in, instead making a note on one of the papers with his pen. The room was filled with the faint scent of his cologne, wood smoke and citrus and something. About it was oddly comforting in its familiarity. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Giordano?" Elena asked, keeping her tone polite. She almost used his first name, as she sometimes did when they were alone, but something about his stiff posture stopped her. Dante finally lifted his gaze. The instant their eyes met, Elena's stomach fluttered. His expression was unreadable, the blue-gray of his eyes cool and assessing. Yes, he said quietly. There are a few things we need to go over. Elena nodded and stepped closer to the desk. Dante's office felt colder than usual, perhaps because the blinds were still drawn, letting in only a sliver of dull morning light. She could just make out his reflection in the darkened window behind him. A tall, forbidding silhouette. Dante set down his pen and leaned back in his leather chair. Firstly, the quarterly report from accounting. You have it prepared, he asked. The question was normal enough, but something in his voice clipped, restrained. Elena forced a smile. Yes, it's on your tablet, and I printed a summary. She offered him the folder she'd brought. He took it without comment, flipping it open. Elena waited, expecting him to scan it as usual, but Dante barely glanced before closing it again. He placed the folder aside carefully. Then he folded his hands. Good. Next item. Elena blinked. He hadn't actually discussed anything about the report. Why call her in if not to talk about it? She sensed an undercurrent in the room, an unspoken tension crackling in the air. Dante's gaze flicked to the window behind her, then back to her face. I've been thinking about the upcoming charity gala. It's in 2 weeks. I'll need you to accompany me. This wasn't unusual. Elena often attended events in a coordinating capacity. Still, Dante always asked in a straightforward manner. This almost sounded like small talk. Of course, she replied softly. I've already started coordinating the RSVPs and logistics. I'll be there to assist you with anything you need that night. He nodded once. A beat of silence followed. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Dante was not a man to hesitate or beat around the bush, yet now it seemed he was circling something he really wanted to say. Is there anything else, sir? She ventured after the pause stretched uncomfortably long. She kept her notepad poised, feigning readiness to take notes, but her heart was thudding with nervous anticipation. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He rose from his chair suddenly, causing Elena to take a half-step back. He walked to the front of the desk, leaning against its edge just a few feet from her. Without the desk as a barrier, the energy between them felt more intense. Dante crossed his arms, regarding her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Was it disappointment? Anger? Worry? Perhaps a mix of all. Elena, he began, his voice low. How long have you been working for me? She cleared her throat, perplexed by the question. It's been almost 3 years, sir. 3 in November. He gave a slight nod, eyes never leaving hers. In all that time, I've come to rely on your discretion and honesty. You understand that? She felt a prickle of dread now. Of course. I pride myself on being trustworthy. Trustworthy, Dante echoed, tasting the word. He uncrossed his arms, planting his palms on the desk on either side of him. His stance was casually intimidating. I'd like to believe that. In fact, I do believe that. Elena's fingers tightened around her notepad. Something was definitely wrong. Dante's next words confirmed it. So if there was something important happening in your life, something that might affect your work or my interests, you would tell me, wouldn't you? He asked softly. Elena felt the color drain from her face. There it was, the edge beneath the calm. Was he testing her? Did he know? Her mind raced through possibilities. Perhaps he'd heard through his grapevine that a cop, her brother, was seen with her, but it was only last night and they had been careful. Except for the hug by the taxi. If anyone recognized him or her, sir, She opened her mouth, then closed it. What could she say? She despised lying, but telling the full truth was dangerous. I try to keep my personal life separate so it won't ever interfere with my work. A wise practice, Dante said, tone cool. Yet not everything personal stays separate, does it? Each word of his was measured, deliberate. Elena's heartbeat hammered in her ears. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of a very high cliff. One wrong step away from plummeting. Dante straightened, moving a step closer. He was within arm's reach now, and Elena had to tilt her head up slightly to meet his eyes. Did you enjoy your evening yesterday? He asked suddenly, almost casually. Elena's breath caught. A spark of panic flared in her chest. He did know, or at least suspected. She schooled her features, attempting to appear merely curious at his inquiry. My evening? Yes, after work. Did you do anything enjoyable? His face was impassive, but she could see a muscle feathering in his jaw. Tension coiled beneath the surface. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Dante never asked about her off hours. This was a trap. She could feel it. For a second, denial danced on the tip of her tongue. She could claim she went straight, home and read a book. But Dante's eyes bored into her, and lying outright seemed both futile and wrong. He wouldn't be asking if he didn't already suspect something. Perhaps honesty, at least partial honesty, would diffuse whatever this was. "I had dinner with someone," she admitted carefully. Her heart was pounding. In the city. Dante's gaze darkened, confirming her worst fear that he already knew. "I see. Anyone I know?" Elena bristled at his tone. Yes, he was definitely interrogating her. That iron control of his was starting to show, cracks in the form of a sharper edge to his voice. "No," she said, lifting her chin a fraction. "Just a friend visiting from out of town." The lie slipped out easier than expected. Technically, Marco had been out of town undercover work, but Dante didn't need that detail. Calling him a friend felt wrong, but what else could she say? She wasn't ready to mention the word brother, not before she understood where Dante was going with this. "A friend," Dante repeated, voice chillingly neutral. He took another slow step forward. Elena instinctively stepped back, until she felt the cool glass of the bookshelf behind her. Dante stopped, still a respectful distance, but closer than colleagues typically stood. He lowered his head slightly, eyes searching her face. "This friend," he went on, "wouldn't happen to be the same man I saw you hugging outside La Fenestra Café. Would it?" Elena's world tilted. He had been there. He had seen her with Marco. The realization made her stomach drop and her nerves ignite all at once. So her uneasy feeling of being watched had not been imagination after all. Dante had followed her. You were there?" she whispered, unable to hide the shock in her voice. Dante's lips pressed into a thin line. "Imagine my surprise," he said, not answering directly, "when I step out for some fresh air and happen to see my most loyal employee in a part of town she never mentioned frequenting, meeting a man I've never seen or heard of before." Elena's heart clenched. There was hurt underlining his words, beneath the cool veneer of sarcasm. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Dante had followed her, or at least caught her by chance. That seemed too unlikely to be chance. He must have followed, but why? Didn't he trust her? Her astonishment quickly fused with anger at the intrusion. "You spied on me?" she asked, her voice trembling not just with nerves now, but with indignation. Dante's eyes flashed. "I looked out for you," he corrected tersely. "The city can be dangerous at night. You should know that." Elena couldn't believe his gall. "So dangerous that I can't have dinner with a friend without your protection," she retorted, unable to keep the bitterness out of her tone. "Yes," Dante snapped, then caught himself. He drew a breath. "I mean, I have a responsibility to ensure my employees are safe. If something were to happen to you—" "Stop," Elena cut in, summoning courage from the well of frustration inside her. She stepped forward off the bookshelf, closing some of the gap between them. "Don't make this about work and safety. You had no right to follow me, Mr. Giordano. None. She only ever used that formal tone when she was truly upset with him." Dante's nostrils flared slightly. "Perhaps I didn't," he said stiffly. "But I did. And what I saw—" He trailed off, and a flicker of something raw crossed his features before he masked it. "What exactly did you think you saw?" Elena demanded. Her fear was rapidly transforming into anger now that the truth was out in the open. She felt exposed and embarrassed that her boss had witnessed such a private moment. Yet beneath that, a dangerous warmth lurked. Was it possible Dante had been jealous? No. She couldn't afford to even consider that confusing hope. Dante took a moment to respond, as if choosing his words. "I saw you with a man," he said finally. "Laughing with him. Embracing him. You looked happy, Elena." The way he said that last word was almost accusatory. The fight drained a little from Elena at the pain she detected behind those words. Why should he sound hurt that she was happy? Was he truly jealous? The thought made her heart skip, but she pushed it aside. This situation was already too volatile. "It was just dinner," she said softly. "A private dinner. I didn't mention it at work because it has nothing to do with work." Dante's jaw tightened again. He paced a short line, agitation creeping into his movements. "Everything about you does have to do with work when you are a part of my circle." "Elena," he said, "don't you understand? I need to know if someone's going to—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, Elena glimpsed the very human frustration in him. Dante was not one to stumble over sentences. Her own emotions were a storm. This was the most personal conversation they'd ever had, and she wasn't sure if she was more angry at his invasion of her privacy or anxious about what he might do next. "Mr. Giordano," she began, striving for calm, "I assure you, Nothing about my dinner was relevant to my job. I am allowed to have a life outside these walls. To her surprise, Dante flinched as if struck. He closed his eyes briefly, then looked at her with a hard stare. "Who is he?" he asked flatly. Elena froze. "I told you, a friend." His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "Don't lie to me." Her temper flared at that. "Or what? You'll follow me again? Have me watched? Search my phone, perhaps?" The hurt and betrayal she felt came pouring out disguised as defiance. "You say I'm trustworthy, yet you're treating me like a suspect." Dante actually took a half-step back at her outburst, clearly not expecting it. In all their years, Elena had never spoken to him like this. She realized her hands were shaking and gripped her notepad to steady them. He grimaced. "If I didn't trust you at all, you wouldn't be standing here. But something about this situation is off. I feel it." His eyes narrowed. "Why won't you tell me who that man really is, unless you have something to hide?" Elena bristled. This was veering into dangerous territory. She thought of Marco, of his warning. Not to get caught in Dante's world when things went bad. She thought of the risk his identity posed. But also, she thought of how utterly unfair this all was. Dante had no right to demand explanations for her personal relationships. Her silence only seemed to infuriate Dante more. He stepped closer again, not menacingly, but with the intensity of someone who cannot hold himself back. "Is he from a rival family? Did someone approach you, Elena? If you're in any trouble..." Elena's eyes widened. He thought perhaps she'd been compromised by a rival gangster. He truly was worried for her safety, or her loyalty, or both. The realization softened something in her, even as his accusation stung. "You think I would sell you out to an enemy?" she asked quietly, hurt creeping into her voice. "After all this time working for you, you think I'd just turn on you?" Dante hesitated. "I don't want to think that," he murmured. "But I had to consider every possibility. You didn't give me any information to work with." Elena swallowed, her throat tight. She couldn't blame him entirely for suspicion that was his nature, forged by a life she only glimpsed from the periphery. But she could clarify this one thing. She set down her notepad on a side table, no longer pretending this was a normal meeting. "Fine," she said, folding her arms. "You want to know who he is? The man I was with is my brother, Dante. His name is Marco." Dante's reaction was subtle but telling. His shoulders loosened a fraction, and something like relief flashed in his eyes before they sharpened again. "Brother," he repeated. He tilted his head. "You've never mentioned a brother." "You've never asked," Elena replied, unable to keep an edge from her voice. "Besides, we're not exactly close these days. He lives upstate with his own life. I hardly see him." The lie of omission weighed on her. She hadn't mentioned Marco's occupation. Not yet. Dante absorbed that, expression still guarded but less icy than before. "So he came to the city just to see you?" Elena nodded, sticking to the personal angle. "Yes, he was worried about me." That was true enough. "Worried?" Dante's brows drew together. "Why would he be worried?" Elena sighed. She had to tread carefully. "He knows my job can be stressful. Long hours, demanding boss," she added with a touch of wryness that she couldn't help, despite the tension. "He thinks I work too hard, and he's always been a bit overprotective." "Overprotective," Dante echoed, tone unreadable. He took that in. "I can understand that. If I had a sister working for someone like me, I might worry too." There was a faint self-derisive twist to his mouth. This small concession in his tone deflated Elena's anger slightly. Maybe, just maybe, they could end this conversation civilly now that she'd explained. But then Dante's eyes flicked aside as if recalling something. "Russo," he said suddenly, the name crisp. "Your file said your last name is Russo. Marco Russo." Elena felt her stomach knot. Dante wasn't a fool. If he hadn't already connected the dots, he was about to. She saw realization dawn on his face in real time. His voice dropped to a whisper, as though the very words tasted bitter. "Detective Marco Russo, that's who he is, isn't it?" There was no use denying it now. Dante's information network had likely given him the name already, or he had pieced it together. Elena drew herself up. "Yes, Marco is a detective with the police." She added quickly, "But he's also my brother. My family." Dante turned away from her, running a hand over his chin. His breathing had quickened, she noticed. When he looked back, his expression was a mixture of incredulity and something akin to betrayal. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew and you didn't tell me." Elena's heart ached at the accusation in his tone. Of course I didn't tell you. Would you have hired me if you knew my brother was law enforcement? Dante opened his mouth, then closed it. They both knew the likely answer. Any Mafia boss would think twice about employing someone with close ties to a cop, even if innocent. My resume, my references, all of that was honest, Elena continued, her voice trembling. I left out that detail because it didn't seem relevant to my job. Marco has nothing to do with me working here. Dante's eyes flashed. He's investigating my operations. Elena's breath caught. Was he? Marco hadn't outright admitted as much last night, but she'd suspected. He hasn't said that to me, she answered truthfully. He mainly lectures me about my safety. Dante regarded her, as if trying to dissect truth from lie. Did he ask you about your work? About me? Elena hesitated. He asked if I was safe. That's all. Technically, Marco had probed a bit, subtly asking if she'd seen anything concerning or any signs of danger around Dante. She'd shut him down, refusing to be his informant. But she didn't volunteer those details now. Dante was already wound tight. You should have told me, Dante said, quieter now but with a hard edge. Not necessarily when you were hired. I understand why you didn't. But when things changed. He left the word hanging, but Elena understood. When we started to matter to each other, however unspoken. At the very least, after seeing him last night. You should have come to me immediately. Elena's anger rekindled. And said what? Boss, I had dinner with my brother who, by the way, is a detective possibly interested in arresting you. Do you hear how insane that sounds? You would have suspected me of all sorts of things. I suspect everyone of all sorts of things, Elena. Dante snapped, raising his voice for the first time. He stepped forward, and this time she didn't back away. They stood nearly chest to chest, glaring at each other. That is how I stay alive. That is how I keep people around me safe. Forgive me for not extending blind trust when the stakes are life and death. They were both breathing hard. Elena had never seen Dante like this, so openly emotional. His eyes were stormy, and up close she could see a faint discoloration beneath them, as if he too hadn't slept. Am I just people around you, then? Another asset in your empire you have to keep safe and in line? Elena's voice cracked. I thought you valued me for more than my efficiency at typing your emails and organizing your meetings. Dante looked stricken. You know I do, he said, almost a whisper. The air between them felt charged. Too many words unsaid, too many feelings unacknowledged. Elena realized with a start that tears had gathered in her eyes, blurring her vision. She blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of him. Dante's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he noticed. He lifted a hand as if to touch her arm, but stopped himself. Elena, he began, voice low and rough. A sharp rap at the doorframe cut through the moment. Both of them turned to see Carlo standing hesitantly at the threshold, eyes darting between the boss and secretary. Elena quickly wiped at her eyes and stepped aside, trying to compose herself. What is it? Dante barked, far harsher than Elena had ever heard him address an employee in her presence. Carlo cleared his throat. Apologies, boss. You asked for an update on the shipment that arrived this morning. We might have a timing issue. He looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing he'd walked in on something intense. Dante inhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair, and straightening his jacket as if donning his icy persona like armor. I'll be there in a minute, he said curtly. Carlo nodded and vanished down the hall. The interruption deflated the immediate tension, but a heavy silence remained. Dante turned to Elena, his face now carefully blank, the mask of control back in place. This conversation isn't over, he said quietly. Elena pressed her lips together. I don't see what else there is to say, sir. Something flickered in his eyes when she said, sir. But he simply replied, we'll continue later. For now, take the morning off. Consider it a reprieve. For both of us. The last part was almost too soft to catch. He moved to brush past her, heading for the door. Elena felt a swell of frustration and hurt. He was just going to walk away now, leave her in this emotional limbo. Without thinking, she reached out and caught his sleeve. Dante. It was the first time she'd said his first name aloud today. He halted, glancing down at her hand on his coat, then up at her face. His eyes were weary, conflicted. Do you really think I would betray you? She asked, voice small but firm. It was the one thing she needed to know. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't want to, he said at last. But trust is difficult for me. He gently pulled his arm free, not unkindly, but decisively. I wish you had been honest. But I understand why you weren't. Elena nodded, tears threatening again. My brother, he only wants to protect me. And I only want to protect what's mine, Dante replied, softly but with conviction. The implication hung in the air. In his own way, he saw her as part of what was his. We'll figure this out, Elena. I just need some time. She swallowed and stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. Take all the time you need. The bitterness in her tone was unmistakable. Dante opened his mouth as if to say something more, perhaps an apology or reassurance. But in the end, he said nothing. He turned and walked out, the click of the door shutting behind him sounding far too final. Elena stood alone in the emptiness of his office, feeling a hollow ache in her chest. She had never imagined that the day she finally confronted Dante Giordano on equal terms would leave her feeling so lost. Yes, one immediate danger was past. Dante knew about Marco now, and at least he hadn't fired her on the spot or worse. But a new uncertainty had taken its place. The dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. She slowly returned to her own desk and sank into her chair. Through the glass wall, she could see Dante marching down the hall with Carlo, already immersed in some business crisis. It was astonishing how quickly he could compartmentalize, sliding back into the role of untouchable Mafia kingpin, while she was left trembling from the aftershocks of their confrontation. Elena realized her hands were still shaking. She clenched them in her lap. This job, this man. It was all far more complicated than she'd ever bargained for. She felt angry at him for pushing her like that, angry at herself for caring so much about his opinion, and angry at Marco for being indirectly the cause of this turmoil. She pondered if she should just walk out and never look back. It would be the smart move. If her brother was right about trouble brewing, being far away from Dante might save her life and her sanity. But the thought of not seeing Dante every day, of not being there to ensure he ate, when he was too busy or to trade, those rare soft smiles when a meeting ended successfully, that thought hurt more than it should. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For now, he'd given her the morning off. Perhaps she should use it to step outside, clear her head, maybe call Marco. He deserved to know that she'd told Dante the truth, at least the brother part. She also needed to make it abundantly clear that Dante was not to be trifled with. Yes, a walk would do her good. Before she could change her mind, Elena grabbed her purse and quietly slipped out, leaving the tension-charged office suite behind, at least for a little while. Dante spent the rest of the day in a state of rigid focus that barely concealed the turmoil inside him. The confrontation with Elena replayed in his mind on a loop, even as he moved through meetings and dealt with urgent issues. By afternoon, the sky outside had cleared to a crisp blue, belying the storm that still rumbled in Dante's thoughts. He stood in his office, staring out at the city skyline without really seeing it. On his desk lay a dossier Carlo had compiled overnight. A detailed report on Detective Marco Russo and every known associate of his. Dante's eyes skimmed over it again. Marco was, by all accounts, a straight shooting cop. Commendations for bravery, a solid record. No signs of corruption or illicit dealings. In a way that should have eased Dante's mind. Elena hadn't been consorting with an enemy or a traitor. But the fact remained. Her brother was effectively his enemy by profession, if not by personal intent. It complicated everything. A knock at his door broke his reverie. It was Carlo carrying more files. "Boss, here are the financials you asked for," he said, placing them on the desk. He hesitated, then ventured carefully. "Everything all right?" Dante realized he must have looked as strained as he felt. He trusted Carlo enough to give a measured truth. "We have a potential situation with Petrov's outfit," he said, changing the subject to one of the external threats he'd been neglecting. "Any word from our sources about their movements?" Carlo nodded, accepting the pivot without question. "Yes, there's chatter that Nikolai Petrov has been sniffing around our businesses on the west side. Nothing overt yet, but it's unusual." Dante's expression hardened. Nikolai Petrov ran the city's Russian syndicate, and had long been a thorn in his side. If Petrov sensed weakness, he would pounce. "Keep our men alert. I want eyes on Petrov's known hangouts. Any meeting, any deal, I want to hear about it." "Understood." Carlo paused, then added with concern, "And what about the other matter? The detective?" Dante's jaw flexed. "Marco Russo is being handled. For now we watch. If he steps too close..." He didn't finish, because the idea of harming Elena's brother twisted his gut. Instead, he waved a hand. "Just keep an eye, as I said. No action without my word." Carlo gave a brisk nod. Dante could see the curiosity in his lieutenant's eyes, but to his credit, Carlo didn't pry. After he left, Dante let out a breath and glanced at the clock. Elena hadn't returned after taking the morning off. He'd half expected an email from her formally quitting, but none came. The thought made his chest tight. Perhaps she needed space as much as he did. Still, not knowing where she was felt wrong. He resisted the urge to text her. He had no right, not after how their conversation ended. Instead, Dante did what he often did to exercise unwanted feelings. He worked. He buried himself in the minutiae of his businesses, reviewing contracts and making calls with ruthless efficiency. But every so often, a flash of Elena's stricken face as she said, "You had no right," would surface, and he'd lose his train of thought. By early evening, Dante decided he'd had enough of the office. He needed to move, to do something tangible. Perhaps a visit to one of their clubhouses in person to show his face, or a drive around the old neighborhood to remind rivals he was present. He grabbed his jacket and told Carlo he was stepping out. Carlo offered to drive, but Dante declined. He wanted solitude. Descending to the parking garage, Dante realized this was the time Elena would normally still be at her desk, wrapping up emails or organizing papers for tomorrow. A pang of regret struck him. He'd effectively chased her away today. He would make it right, he vowed. Once his head was clearer, he'd talk to her calmly. Try to salvage their working relationship, if not more. As he slid into his black sports car, his phone vibrated. He checked it, expecting a security update. Instead, he saw a text from an unknown number. "We have the cop. If you want him alive, come to Pier 27 at midnight, alone, and bring the girl." Dante's blood ran cold. The cop, that had to mean Marco, and the girl could only mean Elena. A surge of protective fury flooded him. Who the hell had sent this? The number was untraceable at a glance. Pier 27 was along the industrial waterfront, a desolate spot perfect for an ambush. His mind raced. Petrov. It had to be. No one else would call Elena the girl as leverage. Perhaps Petrov's men had discovered Marco snooping around or simply learned of his connection to Dante's secretary. Either way, Petrov had made a bold move, one that practically screamed trap. His first instinct was to call in his soldiers and storm the pier in overwhelming force. But the message's instructions stopped him. They wanted him alone, with Elena, likely as hostages to trade or leverage. If he deviated, Marco might die before they could reach him. A rare fear gripped Dante's heart at the thought of Elena being targeted. In trying to shield her from his world, he had inadvertently painted a bullseye on her back. The enemy clearly thought kidnapping Marco would lure Elena, and thus Dante, into a vulnerable position. Jaw set, Dante dialed Carlo and relayed the situation tersely. Carlo swore under his breath. "Pier 27. That area's basically Petrov's backyard. I'm certain it's him." "I agree," Dante said. "Marco's been taken. They want me and Elena in exchange or as bait." Carlo's voice hardened. "We can't let you go in alone. It's suicide." "I have no intention of walking in blind," Dante replied. "But if Petrov wants a show, we'll give him one." He quickly outlined a plan. He would go, but his men would shadow at a distance, ready to intervene on his signal. He knew Petrov would also have backup lurking. "And Elena?" Carlo asked. Dante's grip tightened on the phone. "She'll be with me. There's no way to keep her out of this now. If I leave her behind, Petrov might have others try to grab her elsewhere." He loathed the idea of placing Elena in danger, but at least if she were by his side, he could protect her directly. "I'll assemble our best," Carlo said immediately. "What about the police?" "No police," Dante said firmly. Petrov would kill Marco the instant he smelled cops. He ended the call and sped out of the garage, tires screeching. It was only then he realized he needed to find Elena. She hadn't returned to the office, but he had an idea where she might be. Elena had spent the afternoon wandering aimlessly through downtown. Trying to clear her head, she had turned off her work phone to avoid any calls, needing time alone to process her future. Eventually, she found herself at a small riverside park, one of the few green spaces in the city's heart. She sat on a bench watching the water, wrestling with her emotions. She loved her job, at least. She loved being good at it and the sense of purpose it gave her. And if she was honest, she cared for Dante, beyond what was wise. But staying in his world meant constant moral compromises and now, possibly personal danger. Marco's warnings rang louder than ever. As the sun dipped low, Elena knew she should head home or at least check in. She powered on her phone to find several missed calls from Marco's number. Oddly, there were also 2 from an unknown number. Her heart lurching, she dialed Marco back, but it went straight to voicemail. That was unlike him. He always answered or at least texted promptly. Worry gnawed at her. What if something had happened? Perhaps he was just trying once more to convince her to leave the job after last night. But multiple missed calls. The unknown number bothered her too. She played the single voicemail that had been left. A distorted voice, clearly using some scrambler, hissed through. If you want your brother to live, Elena, go to Dante. He will bring you to Pier 27 at midnight. Come willingly, or Marco dies. Elena's blood turned to ice. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. That voice, was it a threat or some sick prank? No, it mentioned Dante by name. This was real. Someone had Marco, and they wanted her and Dante at the pier. Her first thought was to call Dante immediately. But even as she reached for his contact, an all-black car screeched to a halt on the lane beside the park. Her instincts screamed danger. Elena stood ready to run. But the rear door flung open and Dante himself stepped out, eyes blazing. Relief and fear flooded her in equal measure. "Dante?" she gasped, frozen in place as he strode toward her. He closed the distance in 3 long strides. Without a word, he took hold of her by the shoulders, looking her over as if checking for injuries. "Thank God you're all right," he muttered. What are you doing here?" Elena stammered, stunned by his sudden appearance and the unexpected warmth of his hands on her arms. "I was looking for you," he said. "Your brother's been taken. Petrov's men, I'm certain. They're trying to draw us out." Elena's knees nearly buckled. "It was true, then. They contacted me. Just now," she managed, showing him her phone with the call logs. Dante's jaw clenched. "Bastards," he growled. His hands slid down from her shoulders to grasp her hands firmly. "Elena, listen to me. They want you and me at Pier 27 by midnight. They're using Marco to lure us." A tremor went through her at hearing it confirmed aloud. "We have to help him," she said, voice breaking. "They'll kill Marco, Dante." "We will help him," Dante assured, tone steely. "But we have to be smart. Petrov expects to trap us. I won't walk you into a slaughter." Elena nodded, clinging to his steadiness. The myriad of conflicting feelings between them was swept, aside by one overriding concern: saving Marco and surviving the night. Dante guided her to the car. "We're going to my estate first. It's safer there while we prepare." Too shaken to protest, Elena got into the car with him. As the driver sped off, Dante kept hold of her hand, a silent promise that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. She found herself drawing comfort from his grip despite everything that had passed between them that day. At the Giordano estate, the atmosphere was frenetic. In the grand foyer, a dozen of Dante's men were arming themselves and reviewing blueprints of the docks. Guns were loaded with efficient clicks, and low conversations buzzed over comms devices. Elena hovered near Dante, feeling out of place among these hardened enforcers. But none of them looked at her with resentment. If anything, she saw sympathy and resolve. News had clearly spread that the boss's secretary and her brother were under threat, and every man there was prepared to fight for their safety. Dante led Elena upstairs briefly, away from the crowd. In a quiet corner of a study, he turned to her, face grave. "Elena, I have to ask you, are you sure you want to come with me tonight? I can try to send you somewhere safe instead." She cut him off, voice firm despite her fear. "They said to bring me. If you show up without me, Marco is dead, and they might come after me anyway. I'm not going to hide while my brother's life is on the line." Dante's eyes searched hers. Whatever he saw there made him nod once. "All right, but you stay close to me at all times. Do exactly as I say. Understood?" "Yes." She swallowed. "Dante, if anything goes wrong..." He gently placed a finger to her lips, silencing her. "Nothing will happen to you. I won't allow it." There was an intensity in those words that left no room for doubt. For a moment, the world outside that room faded. Dante's hand, now cupping her cheek, was warm and steady. Elena realized she was trembling, and not only from fear. The proximity, his protective vow, despite everything, it made her heart ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes yet again. "This is all because of me." "No," he said fiercely. "It's because of Petrov, because of the lives we were born into." "Not you." He hesitated, then added, "If anything, it's because of me. Petrov saw you as a way to hurt me." He closed his eyes briefly, forehead almost touching hers. "I never wanted you to be in danger like this." Elena's breath caught. She realized with startling clarity that Dante's greatest fear wasn't losing his Empire tonight. It was losing her. In that charged second, she let herself do something impulsive and brave. She reached up and wrapped her arms around him, drawing him into a tight embrace. Dante stiffened in surprise, then all at once relaxed against her. His arms circled her back, holding her close. Elena felt his heartbeat, strong and fast against her own. In the dim light of the study, they clung to each other as if each were the other's lifeline. "Promise me," she murmured against his shoulder. "We'll both come out of this alive. All three of us." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "We will," he vowed quietly. "I promise." There was so much more to say. Apologies, confessions, forgiveness. But a knock on the doorframe interrupted them. Carlo's voice came from the hall. "Boss, it's time." Midnight was approaching. Dante and Elena separated, exchanging one last look heavy with unspoken feelings. Dante's thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had escaped. Then he turned, all business once more, and led her downstairs. The convoy to Pier 27 was swift and silent. Dante and Elena rode together in one car. Carlo and a few others followed at a distance in vans with their lights, off to avoid detection. Dante had argued against bringing a large force, but Carlo insisted on at least having backup in the shadows. Elena's stomach was in knots as they neared the waterfront. Stacks of shipping containers loomed like giant tombstones under the sparse dock lights. The pier jutted into dark water that gently lapped at the pilings. Farther out, the lights of a few moored cargo ships blinked, oblivious to the drama unfolding on shore. Dante's driver stopped about 100 yards from the indicated spot. "This is as close as I dare without being seen," he said in a hushed tone. Dante nodded. "Wait for my signal. If things go wrong," he trailed off, eyes cutting to Elena. "We'll handle it." Carlo's voice crackled in Dante's earpiece from the trailing van. Dante turned to Elena, squeezing her hand once. "Stay behind me," he instructed. Heart thudding, Elena followed Dante out of the car. The night air was brisk and smelled of salt and engine oil. They walked forward onto the pier, each footstep echoing hollowly on the wooden planks. Elena clutched the back of Dante's jacket with one hand, as he'd allowed, maintaining physical contact. Under a flickering floodlight, a group of figures awaited. Elena recognized the broad, thick shape of Nikolai Petrov from photos. The Russian mob boss stood with a smug stance, a pistol in one hand. Beside him, two henchmen restrained a third, figure on his knees, Marco. Elena's breath caught when she saw her brother. Marco's face was bruised, blood at the corner of his mouth, and his hands were bound behind him. But he was alive. She saw his chest heaving and his eyes flicker with relief and alarm as they landed on her and Dante. Well, Petrov called out in a thick accent, grin flashing gold teeth. "Right on time, and here I was worried you wouldn't bring our lovely guest." His gaze slid over Elena, making her skin crawl, before focusing on Dante. "Giordano, brave of you to come." "You have what you want, Petrov," Dante replied coldly. "Now let him go." Petrov laughed, a coarse rasp. "What I want?" "Not quite. I want territory. I want respect. You've given me neither. Instead, you bring me a gift." He nodded toward Elena. "A pretty bargaining chip indeed." Elena's nails dug into Dante's jacket. Dante positioned himself partly in front of her. "If you lay a finger on her, I'll kill you," he said, voice deadly calm. Petrov tutted. So protective. "Maybe I will take more than a finger." He motioned with his gun, and one of his men hauled Marco up by the hair, pressing a knife to his throat. "Unless you agree to a trade, your life for theirs. Surrender, Giordano. Step into that empty container over there and put a bullet in your own skull. Then maybe I let the cop and the girl go." Elena's heart lurched. That wasn't a deal, it was vengeance. She could feel Dante's body tense, ready to spring. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a flicker of movement behind a stack of crates. Carlo's team creeping into positions. Petrov's goons hadn't noticed yet. Petrov lifted his gun, aiming it vaguely at Elena. Dante immediately sidestepped, fully shielding her with his body. "I'm right here, Nikolai. This is between us. Let them go and settle it with me like a man." Petrov smirked. "Tempting, but where's the fun if I can't watch you suffer first?" He nodded to his goons. "Perhaps I carve up the detective a bit, then." He never finished the sentence. In a blur, Dante lunged forward, drawing a concealed pistol from inside his jacket. A shot rang out, deafening in the silence. One of Petrov's henchmen crumpled, clutching his leg with a cry. Chaos erupted. Petrov shouted in Russian and fired wildly. Dante shoved Elena down behind a coil of rope as bullets whizzed past. Another crack of gunfire came from the darkness, Carlo's snipers. The second henchman released Marco to return fire, and Marco, seizing the moment, twisted away despite bound hands, kicking the man's knee out. The henchman howled as he went down. Elena crawled to Marco on instinct, grabbing his arm to drag him toward cover. Dante kept himself between them and the enemies, squeezing off precise shots. Petrov dove behind a metal bollard, cursing. Within seconds, Carlo's men swarmed the edges of the pier. "Drop your weapons," one shouted. Petrov's injured goons, outnumbered, were quickly disarmed and pinned. Seeing his plan collapsing, Petrov bared his teeth and made a last desperate move. He sprang up from cover and lunged toward Elena and Marco, gun outstretched. Dante was faster. He threw himself into Petrov's path. The two men struggled, Petrov slamming Dante against a cargo crane's steel support. Petrov was burly, stronger in close quarters. He forced the pistol from Dante's hand, which skittered across the pier. Elena screamed Dante's name as Petrov swung him around and punched him savagely in the ribs. Dante grunted, retaliating with an elbow strike that snapped Petrov's head back. They grappled, dangerously close to the pier's edge now. Black water churned below. Suddenly, Petrov overpowered Dante with a furious charge, sending them both crashing onto the wooden deck. Petrov landed on top, wrenching a knife from his belt. In a flash, he plunged it toward Dante's chest. "No!" Elena cried. Sheer adrenaline propelled her forward. She snatched up Dante's fallen pistol from the planks. Without thinking, she aimed at Petrov's broad form and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed, and Petrov jerked, the blade clattering from his grasp. Elena's shot had hit his shoulder. With a snarl of agony, Petrov rolled off Dante, clutching the wound. Dante seized the opening. He grabbed Petrov's collar and, with a furious strength, heaved the Russian sideways. Petrov's body slid over the edge of the pier, a look of shock on his face as he disappeared into the dark river with a splash. Panting, Dante crawled back from the edge, eyes fixed on the water. Petrov did not resurface. Weighted by his coat and injuries, he likely sank fast. One of Petrov's remaining men started toward the edge as if to help, but a warning shot from Carlo froze him. The fight was over. Elena dropped the gun, her hands shaking violently as reality set in. She had shot someone, possibly killed him. A sob rose in her throat. But then Dante was there, kneeling and pulling her into his arms. "It's okay," he soothed, voice strained but gentle. "Elena, you saved my life." She clung to him, tears finally spilling as the adrenaline rush ebbed. I thought he was going to..." She couldn't even say it. Dante stroked her hair, pressing his forehead to hers. "Shh, I'm here. We're both here." A groan from nearby reminded Elena of Marco. She quickly pulled back from Dante and rushed to her brother, who was sitting propped against a crate, helped by one of Dante's men. His hands were already untied. "Marco!" Elena threw her arms around him gingerly. He hissed in pain but hugged her back with one arm. The other, she noticed, hung oddly, likely dislocated or worse. "You okay?" Marco coughed, managing a weak grin. "Never. Been happier to see you, sis." Elena laughed through her tears. "Same here, you idiot. You're lucky we got here in time." Marco's gaze shifted to Dante, who had risen and approached, favoring one side slightly. Marco nodded to him. "Guess I owe you one, Giordano." Dante's expression was guarded, but he inclined his head. "We protect our own," he replied simply. Sirens began wailing in the distance. No doubt someone had reported the gunshots. Dante's crew moved with practiced efficiency, gathering weapons and hustling away before law enforcement swarmed the area. There would be a careful cover story, Elena was sure, but at that moment she didn't care about the details. Dante issued low orders to Carlo to handle any police who arrived, through bribes and a plausible account that pinned everything on Petrov's crew. Then he turned back to Elena and Marco. "We need to get you both out of here," he said. His face tightened as his eyes fell on the purpling bruise on Marco's temple and the blood soaking through Marco's shirt from a shallow stab wound. "Our doctor is waiting back at my estate. He can treat you discreetly." Marco opened his mouth, perhaps to object, but one glare from his sister silenced him. "Thank you," she said to Dante, giving him a meaningful look. They both knew a hospital would invite too many questions. As Dante's car sped them away from the pier, Elena sat between Dante and Marco in the back seat, holding both of their hands. Dante's fingers were slick with a bit of his own. Blood, Elena realized with alarm. He'd been cut or stabbed in the scuffle. a crimson patch staining his dress shirt near the ribs. "You're hurt," she exclaimed softly, looking at him with concern. "It's nothing," he murmured, though his wince told otherwise. "Just a scratch." From the other side, Marco let out a weary chuckle despite his pain. "You two, quite the pair." He gave a sidelong glance at Dante, attempting a stern look that failed due to his battered state. "I guess I should say thank you. You saved my life." Dante shook his head. "We all saved each other. You can thank your sister too, she was fearless." His eyes flickered with pride toward Elena, making her cheeks warm even as exhaustion settled over her. Marco noticed that exchange. He managed a half smile. "Maybe I misjudged things," he said quietly. "Not the danger, you're definitely troubled, Giordano, but maybe the way you feel about my sister." Elena's eyes widened slightly at Marco's bold implication. She looked to Dante, curious and anxious for his response. Dante, ever composed, simply replied, "I'd die for her." "That's all you need to know," Marco grunted, seemingly satisfied by the gravity in Dante's tone, and leaned his head back, eyes closing. Elena's heart soared at Dante's admission. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't even a direct "I love you," but it was true, and raw. She squeezed Dante's hand, and he returned it, finally meeting her gaze. In that look, in the darkness of the car illuminated occasionally by passing streetlights, Elena saw everything he couldn't yet say in words. It mirrored everything she felt. She reached out and gently brushed a damp lock of hair off Dante's forehead. He leaned subtly into her touch. No matter what tomorrow brought, cops, criminals, or any other threat, they had crossed a line together. They had become something more than boss and secretary, more even than friends who harbored feelings. They were partners, bound by loyalty, trust, and a love forged in danger. Several hours later, near dawn, Dante's estate was calm once more. The private doctor had treated Marco's injuries and Dante's stab wound, assuring both men they'd be fine. Marco, on painkillers, had fallen asleep in a guest room, despite protests that he needed to report to his precinct. Dante promised to handle the police inquiries through discreet channels. After all, an official story that Petrov's men turned on each other in a smuggler's quarrel had conveniently been fed to the responding officers. Marco was in no shape to argue, and truthfully, Elena suspected her brother was reevaluating some of his black and white views after tonight. In the expansive living room, Elena sat with Dante on a plush sofa. The adrenaline had faded, leaving exhaustion and a depth of emotion that made her chest tight. She cradled a cup of hot tea. She couldn't recall being given. Likely one of Dante's staff had pressed it into her hands. Dante had an arm around her shoulders, his own tea ignored on the coffee table. His shirt was off, the stab wound on his side cleaned and bandaged. Elena's eyes traced the bruises already, darkening on his torso from Petrov's blows. She touched one gently. "Does it hurt terribly?" He managed a faint smirk. "I've had worse." Then softer. "It was worth it. We saved him. And you—" He broke off, eyes shining with something earnest. "You were incredible tonight, Elena." She flushed and shook her head. "I was terrified. You still acted. Without you, Petrov might have won." He tilted her chin with his fingers, ensuring she met his gaze. Not many people can stare down their worst fears and push through. "You did." Elena felt a tear slip free. "I only did it because I couldn't let him kill you," she whispered. The admission hung between them, an echo of what he'd declared in the car. Dante's thumb gently brushed the tear from her cheek. He leaned in and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead. "And I can't let anything happen to you." Tonight proved that to me more than ever. Elena closed her eyes at the warmth of his lips on her skin. She turned her face up, and he hesitated only a second before cupping her cheek and gently kissing her, a real kiss, soft and full of all the unsaid emotion between them. Elena sighed against his mouth, her arms coming around his neck. It was as natural as breathing to melt into him. When they parted, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "For what?" she asked, eyes searching his. Those stormy eyes now calm, filled with unguarded affection. "For everything. For putting you in danger. For not trusting you fully when I should have. For pushing you away when all I wanted was to pull you closer." His voice caught, and Elena realized this was Dante at his most vulnerable. Her heart swelled with empathy and love. "We both made mistakes," she said. "I should have been honest about Marco. I was just afraid." "I know," he replied. "Fear has guided too many of my decisions, too. But nearly losing you—" He broke off, a flash of pain in his eyes at the memory. It made one thing very clear. I don't want to live like that anymore. Elena stroked a lock of hair off his brow, fingers lingering. What do you mean? Dante drew a breath, as if gathering courage. This life, my empire, as Marco called it, it means nothing if it costs me everyone I care about. He paused. I've been thinking, even before tonight, about making changes. Diversifying legitimate businesses, stepping back from the bloodshed. Perhaps Petrov's exit will buy a little peace, but someone will always come to take his place. I can't keep doing this forever. Elena listened, astonished and hopeful. Was Dante Giordano truly contemplating an end to his reign in the underworld? He managed a wry smile at her expression. Don't look so shocked. I'm not saying I can flip a switch and become a saint. But for you, I can try to be a better man than the one who stormed into that cafe in a jealous rage. He brushed his knuckles over her cheek. You make me want to be better. A weak chuckle came from the doorway. They both turned to see Marco, groggy but awake, leaning against the frame with a blanket around his shoulders. Must be the meds. 'Cause I swore, I just heard the infamous Dante Giordano talking about retirement plans. He teased hoarsely. Elena felt embarrassment creep up, but Dante only smirked. Go back to bed, Russo. Eavesdropping is bad manners for a guest. Marco gave a half salute. Fine, but for what it's worth, if you do as you say, Giordano, you might actually earn that future you two want. His eyes shifted meaningfully between them. Take care of my sister, or you'll answer to me. Despite his battered state, Marco managed a grin that was almost friendly. Dante inclined his head solemnly. You have my word. Satisfied, Marco shuffled back to his room. Elena exhaled, leaning into Dante's side. Dawn's first light was creeping into the room, painting everything in gentle gray. Outside, rain had begun to patter, another shower from the waning storm clouds. Come, Dante said, rising and offering her his hand. I want to show you something. Curious, Elena took his hand. He led her through the glass doors onto a wide terrace that overlooked the estate's gardens. The world smelled fresh and new in the early light. A soft rain was falling, droplets clinging to leaves and railings, misting their faces. Elena shivered slightly at the chill, but Dante wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her close under the slight overhang where they stood. Together they gazed out as the sun nudged over the horizon, golden rays piercing through the light rain. It was a beautiful sight, a promise of a new day. You once told me you hated the rain, Elena said softly, recalling a passing comment he'd made on a dreary day at the office long ago. Dante gave a low hum. That was before I had a good memory associated with it. Elena tilted her head. Which memory? He smiled down at her. The night I followed you. As painful as parts of that were, it was the night that changed everything. The night I finally admitted to myself how much you meant to me. Elena felt tears prick again, but this time they were happy. For a while there, I thought I meant nothing to you outside of a paycheck. Dante turned her gently to face him, the rain peppering his dark hair and her shoulders. You are everything to me, Elena. Paycheck or not. Whether I'm a mafia boss or just a man trying to be worthy of you. His words, earnest and a bit rough, left her breathless. She placed her hands over his. I'm not going anywhere, she promised. I love you, Dante. It was the first time either had spoken those 3 words explicitly, and saying them felt like releasing the last weight in her chest. Dante's eyes glimmered. He drew her into another kiss, slow and deep, as the gentle rain continued to fall around them. This kiss tasted of salt tears and fresh starts, of promises kept and new ones made. Behind them, the sun finally broke free of the clouds, casting a rainbow through the remaining drizzle. Elena and Dante remained entwined, oblivious to all else. In that poignant moment, the ruthless Mafia king and his once cautious secretary were just 2 people in love, standing together as the dawn of a new chapter in their lives unfolded. Together, and unafraid of whatever storms the future might bring.